Okay, I think it's recording now. Okay, so welcome to part two of Your Financial Future, trademarked by Dr. Caruso. So last time we talked a lot about risk management and mostly talking about insurances, emergency fund. Um, the more I give this talk, the more I think that this section, part two, is probably the most important part for you guys to take away, because it's a lot of just behavior, and personal finance is a lot of sort of behavioral management. And if I could talk about 401ks, Roth Iras, 529s, solo 401ks, etc. But if you don't have, like, particularly the savings rate and the savings mentality, all the other stuff doesn't matter. There's no fancy tool that will get you there if you don't have the behavior of, being a saver and making financial independence one of your key goals. So let's dive in. So the first step, of course, is, figure out your cash flow, right? So cash flow is how we live our lives, right? We have income and we have expenses. And as residents, hopefully you know exactly what your income is, your paycheck. Hopefully your expenses aren't too crazy. So it should be pretty easy to calculate out your monthly expenses as well. So you should know where every part of your paycheck's going. So catalog all income and all expenses, right? So expenses, as I alluded to last time, fall into two categories: as your fixed expenses. These are things that you can't easily change, like your rent, your utility payment, internet, phone, etc. And then dynamic expenses are things that you have control over: your entertainment budget, your food budget, travel, all of that kind of stuff. Um, it's also good to check in every periodically, uh, because you might actually be paying for stuff that you don't know about in the era of, auto pay. I've definitely been guilty of that in the past. And really, the most important thing is to have positive cash flow every month, right? Live below your means always. Some of this is preachy, but it's really to drive the point home, right? Um, those of you who are about to graduate, you've delayed gratification your whole life. So hold out a little bit longer, live like a resident for a couple more years, and then you'll be well on your way. Those first couple of years when you're in attending and really saving and clearing out some of that debt that you have is the key to sort of catapulting you to that financial security that you're looking for. And you guys are graduating at a time when the anesthesia job market has been uh, honestly better than I've ever seen it. So congrats on your timing. But just remember, high income does not equal high net worth, right? So having a good amount of assets saved is what equals a high net worth. And you can do that with a low income or a high income. It's about creating that habit of that savings habit. So where does your money go, right? So just to give you some perspective of the typical things that come out of your cash flow, your income, right? So what percentage of your paycheck will go towards taxes? Well, that varies depending on where you live, whether you're in a high cost of living area or a low cost of living area. But for an anesthesiologist, that can be anywhere from 30 to 40% of your gross income will go towards taxes, right? So if you live in Manhattan, you got to pay New York state tax, you got to pay city tax, you got to pay, your federal taxes, obviously. So it's quite a lot of tax versus, a no tax state like Florida or Texas, are the two prominent ones, right? But just know that that's a big chunk of where your income's going. And you have no control of that, right? So you're going to pay that no matter what. Risk management. So these are all the insurances, establishing the emergency fund. Generally, about 5 to 10% of your income will go towards risk management. All your premiums that you're paying for, your life insurance, disability insurance, health insurance, malpractice insurances, uh, homeowners insurance, all of that. Saving and investing. So for your own retirement, for your kids, that should be 20 plus percent. And we'll get to why it should be 20 plus percent. And personally, I think of savings and investing that 20 plus percent as something that is automatic, like my taxes, right? So just like I have no choice about taxes, the way I structure my finances is that the savings and investing is automatic. And if I I'm my um, my accounts are running low for whatever reason, for whatever expenses that I have, I make every effort to make sure that I don't uh, neglect putting in that 20+%, right? So, and I think that's the way that you all should approach it as well, because that's the only way to achieve your financial security and those financial goals. Debt reduction, right? A lot of you have pretty massive debts, right? You have a mortgage without the home, right? And so some of you have none. So, congrats to you. But that could be anywhere from 0 to about 30% of your gross income that goes towards debt reduction, right? So I know that some of you are sitting there doing the math, right? So let's see, 40 plus 10, 50 plus 20, 70 plus 30, 100%, right? So that means you have no more money left to live and to travel and go out to eat. Well, whatever's left over is the rest, right? So those should go towards your living expenses, the other goals that you're thinking about, charitable contributions as well, right? And the thing is that most people who don't budget appropriately, they do this first, all of this stuff first, right? And the taxes they have to do, but the savings or the debt reduction portion, that part comes last. And that's how people get behind on their financial life, right? So that's how you see, senior physicians who are living paycheck to paycheck despite their high income, which is, kind of sad to see. But if you structure your life this way, then you'll see that actually it seems like I know there's 100% gone, right? But actually you'll see there's quite a bit left over for the rest, right? And just to illustrate the example, perhaps you're a single attending. Uh, Actually, Corey's not here tonight, right? But he's single attending, living in Manhattan, right? So he's gonna have to watch the replay of this, right? So if you're making 300K income, taxes, right? 40%, 120K is going to go towards taxes, right? Risk management, 5 to 10%, right? So I put in 15K for that. Savings and investing, 20%, 60K going towards savings and investing, right? Debt reduction. Let's say you have 250K in debt, right? If you want to clear off that debt in 5 years, it's going to cost you roughly 60K a year to get that down. If you want to clear it off in 10 years, it's still going to cost you about 35K a year that you have to put towards your debt, right? And what's left over? It's still a decent amount of money left over, right? 45 to 70K. You guys make about what, 50 to 60K. So, you have about 30K, 30 to 40K post-tax, probably something like that, in a year. So you're able to achieve your goals and still get an upgrade, right? So uh, that's kind of the way that I would think about structuring your budgets going forward, right? And this is something, by the way, it's not just okay when you're attending, just turn it on like a switch, right? I encourage the residents all to contribute to a Roth IRA if they can during residency, and it's not so much that the $5,000 or the $6,000 that you put in to your Roth IRA as a resident is going to turn into like $10 million when you retire. The point is, it's creating that habit of making savings as an automatic thing that you can't skip, right? And if you start doing that as a resident, once you become an attending, it just can become second nature, right? Debt management. I know that some of you on this call have a significant amount of debt, right? So how do you tackle the debt part, right? And we'll get to debt versus savings. And so if you have high interest debt, anything greater than 8%, I consider high interest, i.e. consumer debt. Not a great thing to have, right? You shouldn't really have that. But if you do, that's fine, but pay it off as soon as possible and balance consolidating it at a lower rate and paying it off in conjunction with your other debts, right? So any super high interest debt like that, you really want to avoid and think about what other options and choices you have, because that builds up really rapidly. Student loan debt, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I think as residents, most of you guys are already familiar with some of the repayment programs like IBER, income-based repayment, pay as you earn. I forget what the acronym is, repay and pay. So these are systems that the government put in place so that you can pay a percentage of your discretionary income. So as residents, you have very little discretionary income. So that means you qualify for very low payments on your loans. That being said, your loans are still accumulating interest during that time. So, you guys know all about that stuff. And really, the program was created not just for residency, but also, there are some physicians who just don't make even six-figure salary, right? So, if they have to make that income for their whole career, they're never going to be able to pay these loans off. So that's what these systems were designed for. There's PSLF, Public Service Loan Forgiveness. I'm not a big fan of PSLF, especially for, this audience, anesthesiologists, right? So it's really hard to say, that you want your loans forgiven when your incomes are going to be so high, right? Compared to a lot of other specialties. And also, it's becoming harder and harder to have these loans forgiven. There's a lot of strings attached to it. You have to be in a need-based area, so you're going to have very limited flexibility in how you want to practice and where you want to live. And realize again, deferment or forbearance, right? So during that time, interest is accumulating, right? So if your deferment means that there's no interest accumulating, forbearance means you don't have to pay, but you the meter's still running, right? For those of you who are interested, right? So how do you consolidate, right? So I get this question a lot. The best bet is just to call these companies, right? And they have loan experts. Obviously they know that residents are the ones who will be looking at this in addition to attendings. If you don't want to call each individual company, there are actually consultants who you can contact that will sort of look at your loan picture, look at your finance picture, look at your potential income, and sort of make the phone calls for you and get you sort of the best rates and the best long-term plan of how to consolidate and how to pay off these loans. Okay, so if you guys have interest in that, I can get you some contacts. There's a couple of companies out there that'll do that for a flat fee. Realize that consolidation, right? You're going from federal loans, which have some forgiveness, right? So they, disability, death, bankruptcy, these loans could be forgiven. But if you consolidate, usually it goes to a private equity company, and these options might disappear, right? So your family might end up facing be on the hook for some of these debts. Okay, and any questions, feel free to stop me and ask questions along the way. So a question that I get quite commonly is, I have so much debt, and you're telling me that I need to save 20% towards of my gross income towards savings. And, what do I do? Do I pay off my debt or do I save, right? And I think you can do both, right? And how much of each you want to do depends on a couple things. Number one, if your employer has a match in their 401k, you definitely want to contribute towards the match, right? Because that's basically part of your income. I consider it part of your income. Because the employer is basically giving it to you if you just save, which is something you have to do anyway. It depends on your loan interest rate. I happen to be lucky and I graduated at a time where I could consolidate my loans down to a 2.1% interest. Sorry, I don't mean to make you jealous, but I'm paying the minimums on my loans. I still have student loans 10 years later because I'd rather invest that money than pay a big lump sum towards the remaining amount of my loan. Now, if you have a 6% loan interest like a lot of you have, then and you can consolidate to something significantly lower, then potentially you would want to prioritize much more money towards debt reduction, because that's a guaranteed 6% rate of return, right? And the stock market will get you about 7 or 8% return historically. So that's one way to think about it. Investing in tax protected accounts, and we're going to go into that a lot more in part 3, but the higher your tax bracket, which all of you will be in a high tax bracket, there's much more benefit to maximizing your tax protected accounts, because if you are in the 35% or 40% bracket, depending on where you live, that money that you put towards a 401k, for example, which is pre-tax money, you're getting a 35 to 40% rate of return on your money right off the bat. And there's like nothing that will give you a guaranteed 35% rate of return on your money, right? And so generally I advocate maximizing all your tax deductible accounts. And then if you have money left over that you want to save, instead of putting in a taxable brokerage account, you could put it towards reducing your debt and getting that 6% or whatever return. And finally, personal preference. There's some people who, say, oh, I can't deal with all this debt that I have. I need to get it out of my life and move on. Versus other people like, you know what, debt is a tool. If you don't pay this debt, if you don't pay more than the minimum, I should say, the governments or these loan companies aren't going to come at you with a baseball bat and say, where's my money, right? So it's my philosophy towards debt has changed, especially now with debt being so cheap, with interest rates being so low. I think that there is opportunity to use debt as a tool to sort of help accelerate your financial goals a little bit. Of course, there's always a risk with debt, with leverage, right? So that if you lose your income or you lose your ability to pay that debt in the future, then that's more risk, and you'll be behind the ball in that. Any questions about that? So I have an example, right? So of what I mean by maximizing your tax protected accounts. So as a married couple, let's say you have access to a 401k. In 2021, the maximum contribution limit is $19,500, and you have an HSA, right? So for W-2 employees, like my wife and I are both W-2 employees, these are pretty much the only pre-tax accounts, tax deductible accounts that we have access to, unfortunately. And so if you do 19,500 times 2 plus 7,000, that's a potential pre-tax savings of 46,000. And let's say you're in a high tax bracket, right? So 40% tax bracket. That means that there's $18,400 less in tax that you would pay that year, right? That's pretty significant amount of money. That's good, right? Now you have two options. Let's say hypothetically you have $46,000 in pre-tax income. You have exactly $46,000 in debt, right? And you choose this option where you're like, I just want to get rid of my debt. I'm not going to put anything into my savings, right? So you put nothing into your savings, right? You have no tax savings. You got rid of all of your debt. You have zero savings, and your net worth at that point would be zero, right? Versus you put into your 401k and HSA, you end up saving $18,400 in taxes that you wouldn't have to pay. You use that money to reduce your debt. So what's your net gain? That $18,400, right? Does that make sense? Any questions about that?
Dr. Nandigam, can you talk more about like an HSA and what that is, and if we should be investing in that?
Yes. So HSA is something I'm going to get into in part 3, but just real briefly, it's a health savings account, right? So this is an account that came about with the Affordable Care Act, and it's only available if there's a high deductible health plan. And the idea that was proposed in the Affordable Care Act was that the high deductible is offset by this HSA account, which is completely tax-free. Okay, so you only will have access to an HSA if you have access to a high deductible health plan that has a health savings account. And so a health savings account there's no tax. You can take a tax deduction on that. Your employer basically submits that $7,000 excluded from your taxes. During the growth phase as you invest that money, you can invest it however you want most of the time. There's no taxes on it. And when you withdraw that money to use it for healthcare expenses, which we all will have at some point in our life, there's no tax on it. So it's the only account that's completely tax-free. The government never takes any taxes from it, right?
Thank you.
And the HSA is like, it can be pretty significant because if 7,000 a year if you're over a 20-year career, $140,000 invested could grow to like $500,000 of tax-free income, right? So, but we'll talk more about HSAs in the next section. So any questions about debt versus savings, right? So generally what I advocate is, don't lose your match. If you have a high interest rate, I'm going to prioritize more towards debt reduction. And I definitely would recommend maxing out all of your tax deductible accounts, like your 401k, your backdoor Roth, your HSA, if you are a W-2 employee, like a lot of you probably will be. If you're 1099, there's even more options to save on taxes, right? Or so if you can open a solo 401k, it can be up to $55,000. I think it's $57,000 now. So that's sort of my general recommendation of debt versus savings. Early financial independence planning, right? So I don't have any money now. I don't know if it's true or not, but the quote that is often said is that Einstein said the eighth wonder of the world is compound interest, right? And so the thing about compound interest, though, is that people think of compound interest as you put money in and it's just like, let me see if I can draw here, and it just grows like that, right? But the reality of compound interest is that it's kind of like this, right? So you need to be up here to get that parabolic curve, right? So you got to really start saving and investing to get to that part of the curve, right? The other reason why, as residents, as I said, to start creating that savings habit, right? So certain accounts like Roth IRAs are very limited, right? They're capped at $6,000 a year. So you don't really have access to that. And Roth accounts can be very powerful because Roths are post-tax money. So you're paying tax on it, but as a resident, you're not paying a whole lot of tax anyway because you're in a lower bracket. But when you take that money out, you might actually end up being in a higher tax bracket, and that money is totally tax-free. So building up that Roth sort of bucket is very important. Structuring your retirement accounts now properly in the beginning will avoid costly mistakes, such as buying into poor investment vehicles like whole life. Remember, we spent a good amount of time last time talking about whole life, and also potentially open up new doors later, like backdoor Roth IRAs. I had actually one of the attendings came up to me and asked me about, what is this backdoor Roth IRA you keep talking about? And we looked at, their situation. And unfortunately, they had rolled over a bunch of old 401ks and 403b accounts that they had gotten, through residency and various jobs into a traditional IRA, into an IRA, by the way, stands for individual retirement account, right? In case anybody doesn't know that. So that's separate from like things like 401k, which your employer provides. And the problem with that is that, she basically, it didn't make sense for her to do a backdoor Roth anymore. So she couldn't contribute any more Roth funds, even though, she wanted to contribute 10 years worth of Roth funds, which, could have ended up becoming, $250,000 of tax-free funds that could have been used in retirement or to pass on to your heirs or whatever. So understanding some of this stuff early on and creating these accounts early on as a resident or a young attending will help set you up for future planning as well. How much money do I need in retirement, right? So how much money do you guys spend on a Monday at work? Not too much.
$0.
Yeah, you guys get your lunch cards too, so you don't even get
Yeah.
that. You don't have to spend money on food, right?
Yeah.
Gas, I guess.
Maybe.
How much do you spend on Saturday? Marie's like $0 because I'm studying for my boards, right?
Yeah. How much is
But you get the
spend on a Saturday?
uh-oh. So you get the point. The point is like, every day is a Saturday. What do you expect your annual expenses to be? And how much of your nest egg can you withdraw? And that's something called a safe withdrawal rate. So this is the percentage of money that you can withdraw from your total nest egg and not run out of money over the course of your retirement, over the course of your lifespan, right? And so the way that you calculate how much you need to retire is, guesstimate what your average annual expenses are, what you think your expenses will be in retirement, divided by the safe withdrawal rate. So some people like to use 3% to be very conservative. Others like to use 4% as sort of, in the next slide, I think we're going to talk about where that number comes from. And that gives you the total amount of money that you would need in your nest egg to retire. But a general rule of thumb, like we talked about with insurance is, but it also applies to retirement accounts, right? Every $1 million approximately will safely get you about 40 to 50K in annual income. And that comes from sort of conservative rates of returns, that 4 to 5% rate of return. And don't forget, you still have to deal with taxes when you retire, right? And so, as I said, part 3 is all about taxes, right? So stuff that you should know about taxes, because taxes are a big deal now, during your earning phase, and in your retirement phase are always a big deal, right? So you can structure things in a way to help minimize the amount of mandatory taxes you have to pay, right? So where does that 3 or 4% rule come from? So they did something called a Trinity Study, and basically they looked at the market from, I think it was 1920, I don't have my little notes here, but 1921 to 1995, and they looked at 30-year periods. So 21 to 51, 22 to 52, et cetera, right? And they looked at stock portfolios, 100% stock portfolios, 100% bond portfolios, and everything in between. And they said, if you retired in 1921 and you had this type of portfolio, how much money can you withdraw from your portfolio every year and 30 years later not run out of money, right? And if you're way over here, like at 12%, right? So I mean, you're gonna run out of money pretty fast, right? If you're over here, even 15 years, you're not gonna make it, right? And so what they came up with was that over that long period of time, about 4% withdrawal rate will more or less, unless you're too conservative in your investments in the 100% bonds, you're pretty much not going to run out of money. At 3%, it's like almost guaranteed that you'll definitely won't run out of money with the same annual expenses. Okay, and so that's where that 4% rule comes, and you'll hear that thrown around a lot in terms of financial planning and retirement planning. That safe withdrawal rate. Any questions about this? Okay. So how much do I have to save? The general rule of thumb is 20% of your gross income saved over a 30-year career will give you a healthy nest egg that will give you a 30-year retirement portfolio. Okay. So 20% for 30 years, right? Now, if you want to work a shorter career, guess what? Your savings rate is going to have to go up, right? So that's why I say 20+%, right? So most of you are in your 30s when you start working as an attending, and let's say you work 30 years and you retire at age 60, which is sort of like the typical pathway of career and retirement in this country, right? It doesn't mean that that's the only way. Then you're looking at saving 20% of your gross income. And it also depends, obviously, on what what kind of lifestyle you live, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. If you want to know the exact numbers, there's a whole bunch of online calculators. If you want to just sit there, it's fun to sit there and play around and move the slider back and forth to see, how much do I need to retire at age, 60 or 58 or 62, and you get a better sense of like, what your savings goals should be. Okay, so this is a little bit of a busy slide, but basically the idea of this slide is that if you invest $1 per month, so $12 a year, right? And you did that for, in this case, we'll use this cell as an example. If you did that for 20 years and you got a 4% rate of return, which is very conservative, right? So the stock market traditionally returns somewhere around, 7 to 8%. After 20 years, you'd have $366, right? Now, if I wanted $1 million at the end of 20 years at 4% rate of return, if I divide by 366, that means I would have to save $2,726, right? And the table at the bottom is the one that's much more interesting, right? So this is 1 million divided by all of these numbers, right? And it gives you an idea of how much money do I need to save in a month to get $1 million. Okay. So if you're going to work for, 20 years, and now how much money do you guys want? Do you guys want $1 million? Right? How much does $1 million give you?
40 to 50,000 a year.
Right. Is that enough? Is that enough for your retirement, Marie?
No.
No. Okay. So I think you want a little bit more, probably,
Yeah,
right?
I
So,
want more.
so let's say 3 million, 4 million, 5 million, right? So whatever your number is. So if you want, and you just multiply by that number, right? So if you want, let's say, $4 million, right? That'll be, let's say, 160 grand a year in retirement, right? So multiply this by 4. So now this number, which seems pretty reasonable, all of a sudden ends up becoming a big number, right? So if you, so let's use 6%, and you want to work for 20 years. You want to retire a little bit early, or at least not retire, but be financially independent a little bit early, around in your early 50s, right? So if I multiply by 4, that's 8,000, right? 8,000 and change a month, right? That's $96,000 a year.
Wow, that's a lot.
That's a lot. But it gives you some perspective. Now, the longer you work, if you work for 30 years, now it's 4,000 a month.
Yeah, that's a big
right?
difference.
It's a big difference, right? And there are some people who are, are you guys familiar with the FIRE movement, right? So financial independence, retire early. There's a bunch of people who are like, I spent all my time, there's a spectrum. I spent all my time studying medicine, but you know what? I really don't like medicine. I want to retire as soon as possible. I want to get out of medicine. I want to do something else, right? And those people like save. They're saving like 50, 60, 70, 80% of their gross income, right? Yeah, they can't do that much actually. So you got to take taxes out of it. So 50% of their gross income, right? As opposed to 20%. And, even if you wanted to do it, if you wanted to work for 10 years and you wanted 4 million, that's 24,000. It's like almost impossible, right? So, but it gives you an idea of that versus people who work like their whole career, how, they can still save a reasonable amount of money over time, right? Does this make sense?
Yes.
So the spectrum is the people who are like ultra frugal, right? Versus ultra frugal versus, the people who are, living paycheck to paycheck, right? Ultra spendthrifts, right? And when we talk about the psychology of spending money, we'll get into that a little bit more. But this table gives you a little bit of an idea of roughly how much money you need to save a month in order to hit your nest egg goal. Okay. I'll delete those later. Okay. So, Corey's not here, so I can't pick on him. But Corey with his options is trying to chase this rate of return, right? And the residents who are buying the Bitcoin instead of putting into their Roth IRA are chasing this rate of return, right? And so the next few slides, I'm going to really hammer home the point of, it's not the rate of return at your stage in your career doesn't matter. The savings rate is the key point, right? And I'm going to be hammering this home at you, okay? So if you look at this guy here, GYFG number 1, right? So he's saving, he makes $100,000. He pays 25% tax. His net income 75,000. Okay. And he decides to save 50% of his post-tax income, and he's not investing it at all. Okay. That's what that column is. So after 20 years, he has 750 grand, right? Now, Sally decides to save about 15% of her income, and she invests it and gets a healthy 8% rate of return over, the course of her investing career. After 20 years, guess what? Even though she's, saving a good amount of money, right? The average American, I think, saves something like 3 or 4% of their gross income, right? So 15% is pretty good and getting a nice rate of return. She still didn't catch up to this guy after 20 years, right? So, and he wasn't even investing. He was just stuffing the money in his mattress, right? So just to show you, savings rate trumps rate of return, okay? Sally would have needed to get an 11% rate of return just to break even, right? Which is, can be pretty difficult to do, to get an 11% rate of return over 20-year period. I'm going to skip this slide. Now, as an attending, let's go over some real world numbers, right? So as a new attending, you could potentially save $4,000 a month and get a nice healthy rate of return of 8%, or you could save $8,000 a month, and let's say you only got a 4% rate of return. Which attending do you think is going to come out ahead? Well, the answer is right here. I tried to make it so it would pop up, but they all popped up at once. So for the first 29 years, attending B will always come out ahead because their savings rate is so much higher. Rate of return only really matters when you have a lot of capital already. So, if you are a resident and you put $2,000 into, some high risk thing, right? And you get a 30% rate of return, right? You got $600. And what's your goal? 4 million, right? So the rate of return doesn't matter. Instead, you should be focusing your energy on how do I get my savings rate higher? How do I put more than $2,000 into whatever I want, right? So your savings rate is the biggest wealth building variable, which you have control over. We don't really have great control over the rate of return, right? Because a lot of times you're going to, the more you chase a higher rate of return, the more risk you're going to take, right? I bought Bitcoin in 2017, it went all the way up to $20,000, and then it went all the way back down to $4,000, right? So when you chase these high risk, high return kind of assets, there's that risk is that you could potentially, even lose your investment, right? So in general, and that's going to be later on when we talk about portfolio construction and what assets to invest in. In general, the more risk that you take, you don't get rewarded for taking on extra risk beyond reaching the financial goals that you want to reach. Does that make sense? So,
Yes, that makes sense.
yeah, so savings rate, right? So don't focus especially in the beginning when you don't have much capital. Chasing a rate of return doesn't matter. It's like, you want to get a good rate of return, but spending your energy on that is less important than figuring out how do I get a higher amount of savings. And just to illustrate the point, right? So, you guys start out somewhere over here, right? Maybe like negative 300K or something like that, right? So you're actually worth less than zero, right? And, as I said, compound interest. So right now you're probably actually going in this direction. Your net worth is decreasing because you have all this interest accruing, right? So with compound interest, you start investing, it doesn't just go like this, right? In fact, it takes a long time to keep going, just to break even, right? Now, the only way you can accelerate this is to keep investing big lump sums of money, savings, towards increasing your net worth, right? And once you start getting to this portion of the curve, that's when things kind of go exponential, right? Oops, I lost my staircase, but you get the point, right? So the savings rate is what's going to accelerate you towards that compound interest portion of the curve, that exponential returns that you see. So you need all that capital to get to that spot, right? So this is a graph that shows that for the first 17 years, most of your net worth is going to be made up of your savings, percentage of your contribution. It's only after about 17 years that the compounding starts to become a big portion of your net worth, where the money starts to accelerate because you have so much money that whatever return is exceeding whatever you're putting into it. Does that make sense? 17 years, right? That's like some people's whole career where to get to that point.
Yeah, that's a long time.
A long time. The only way you can accelerate it is take bigger and bigger chunks, right?
Yeah.
Instead of saving 20%, if you save 25%, you'll accelerate towards that orange part.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why, I say that savings, I think, is like tax. Is, just like how you're taxed, your savings, your contributions are also automatic tax. That's stuff that I can't touch, right? That the government will come after me if I don't save. That's the way I think about it. And so you say, well, how the heck am I going to save? What was it? $8,000, right? So $8,000 a month. How am I going to save that? There's no way. Well, it goes back to that budget, right? Make it automatic. Pay your taxes, pay your premiums, protect your whole financial career. When my paycheck comes in, the part that goes to the brokerage accounts, the 401ks doesn't even come to my checking account, right? But I have it set up so that the set amount of money that we want to save per month automatically just disappears and goes to the brokerage account. It's not even in my checking account, right? So I don't even see that money. Debt reduction, and then finally live off the rest. And if you structure your budget and your lifestyle this way, you'll find that the rest goes quite a long way, right? And so I don't hesitate if there's something there's a trip or something we want to take, or there's something that we really want or need. I don't go and think, okay, should I take away from my savings? If we have money in our accounts, then I spend it, right? Guilt-free, because I've already taken care of everything else that I need to take care of, right? Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions about budgeting, debt, savings rate? Did I hammer the point home? Save, save, save.
Yeah, you did.
Okay. So, how do we save? How do we get to that point, right? So the other thing is, how you spend your money, right? And I'm a big fan of positive psychology, right? So for a long time, psychology was focused on like the pathologic states, right? And in the last 20 years or so, there's been a lot of research on positive psychology, positive states. What is it that makes people happy? What is it that makes people thrive, right? And one of the things that they studied is people's relationship to money and how money makes you happy, right? And what they looked at was, how much do people need to earn and how much do people spend in order to feel happy, right? So any idea like how much income you need in the United States? How much income do you need to make to have peak happiness? So it's about $75,000, believe it or not. The people who make more money than that are not measurably more happier than the people who make that $75,000. And the idea is that once you have all of your basic needs met, right? Food, clothing, shelter, right? There are other factors that go into what makes you happy. Very good. Ganette's husband knew the answer. It was $75,000. Props to you. So, and I know that you guys, 200,000. Nope, sorry. 75,000, right? And so but that tells you, like, what it is that we think it is that makes us happy, right? So I know you guys are down here, right? And you're like, well, anything more would make me happy, right? But the point is that as you earn more and more income, actually, you might actually be more unhappy because there's a cost to earning all that income, right? If it's long hours or unfulfilling job or whatever. So in terms of spending, depends on what you spend your money on, right? To get that. So money is a tool which can be used to buy, in order most happiness to least happiness, right? Time and autonomy. Being able to structure your life the way you want to, as opposed to the way that you're forced to, right? You, as residents, you guys have lots of time and autonomy, so I know you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? So as attendings, if you structure your life in such a way that you're dependent on your paycheck to buy all these things that you want or need, right, and sacrificing that for time and autonomy is where things go wrong, right? um, Truly, the only finite resource we have in our lives, I think, is time, right? So that's something that we can never get back. I mean, unless one of you invents a time machine, but I don't think that's happening anytime soon, right? The next thing is experiences, right? So when you spend your money on experiences, vacations, get-togethers, social get-togethers with family, friends, especially experiences with other people, that tends to bring lasting happiness, right? So they studied happiness is about, I think, 40% genetic. My numbers might be slightly off, right? Um, and 40% genetic, and then there's an environmental component, which is also 50%, 10%, and then 40%. I forget what it is exactly, but the environmental component is a big portion um, of what makes you happy. And you you end up going back to a set baseline of happiness, particularly with relation to money. When you spend something, you buy um, when you spend money on things, when you get on the hedonic treadmill. Are you guys familiar with the concept of the hedonic treadmill, right? So the best example I can think of is like BMW, like the capitalistic nature of our country, right, is all about getting you on that hedonic treadmill, right? So you buy a BMW 3 Series, right, and your happiness goes up, and after a while, you go back to that baseline, right? And then now you want to buy the 5 Series, right, and your happiness goes up, you go back down to that baseline, right? So things give you a fleeting moment of happiness, and then you revert back to your happiness baseline. Okay. Experiences and memories give you sort of a longer period of happiness before you go back to the baseline, and sometimes raise your baseline, right? And then structuring your life with autonomy, with things like, self-improvement, constantly learning, gratitude practices, giving back to the community. Those are things that permanently increase your happiness baseline. Okay. And so we end up, thinking that earning more money and spending more money and buying the things that we want is how we can achieve that happiness, right? And that's not true. And that's been shown time and time again with the happiness researchers in the positive psychology space. Beware of excessive lifestyle inflation and the hedonic treadmill, right? If you start flying first class the moment you become an attending, then you know what? You can only fly first class. You'll be unhappy if you have to go back to coach, right? So, beware of lifestyle creep. Now, I'm not saying that, only never ever fly first class. I'm just saying that you have to make sure that you factor in if all of your budget, and if that's something that makes you happy as a treat or something like that, and you have everything else taken care of, that's fine. that will give you that experience of happiness, right? This is a quote that I saw somewhere. It says, "It's not having what you want, it's wanting what you've got." And I'm starting to date myself with Sheryl Crow.
No, I know that song.
You know that song, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think that was a great line, right? So not
Yeah.
wanting, not having, it's not having what you want, it's wanting what you've already got, right? So, um, and that's a great way to stay off this hedonic treadmill. The other thing to think about with, if you're thinking about a purchase or buying things, right? So, think of it as the opportunity cost of what if I had invested that money, right? So spending $10,000 today is giving up, $40,000 20 years from now, that if I had invested it, or $80,000 30 years from now, right? I mean, that could be, you're talking about getting up to numbers where that could be your annual expenses, right? On whatever it is that you were trying to buy right now. So, um, the point that I'm making is not don't ever spend money, but make conscious, deliberate decisions about what you're spending your money on, especially like the big ticket items, things like cars, homes, um, you know, uh, where you live, cost of living, right? All of those things will make a pretty big impact on your whole financial career, obviously. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. So, part two, actionable items, right? Create a plan to tackle your debt, all of it, right? Whether it's consolidation as a resident or waiting to consolidate as an attending. And I've had, discussions with a number of you about this. Make savings automatic, just like your taxes, and start as a resident. What I typically say is resident priorities are number one, financial education, which is some of what you're getting here, but also some of the books and things that I've recommended to you already. Get disability insurance from part one and make sure that you adjust your life insurances and things that you need for your family, and create this savings habit, right? So I uh, was married, living in Manhattan, single earner, and I, saved towards a Roth IRA as a resident, right? So it's possible. Okay, so it's you all know how expensive it is to live in Manhattan. Um, it's just a matter of creating that habit. Analyze your cash flow and automate your financial priorities, and live off the rest. Spend your money in a deliberate, guilt-free manner, which maximizes your happiness. Right. So time, autonomy, experiences, and lastly, things. Right. Now, I give this talk all the time, and people think, oh, he must be such a miser, doesn't never spends his money. He's just thinking about saving, saving, saving. It's far from the truth. You'll, especially as an anesthesiologist, with the incomes that you guys will be earning right out the door, actually, right? So I didn't earn I much my first couple of years, to be honest, as an attending, because the salaries were nowhere near what they are now, and still the rest goes quite a long way. So, questions? So what's the moral of the lesson, or what's the moral of this part two?
Save your money.
Say, make your savings automatic, deliberate, right?
And invest.
So part 3 and 4 will be about the investing, right? So, when I give this talk, people think like, okay, I'm going to sit there and talk about 401ks and, what percentage to put in what. But like I said, if you don't have this part down, right? And this is why I put those numbers of, how much you need to save per month, and you get sticker shock, right? Yeah, gonna sure. So, and that sticker shock is there on purpose, to get you an idea, to think about what kind of numbers you're facing, right? What you have to look at. So, go ahead, Gannett. You're typing it in, I guess. Ah, no worries. Trying to unmute. There's nothing like in this section, there's nothing too revolutionary, but it's amazing to me how many people don't do this, how they don't make savings automatic, how, they don't spend deliberately and they just kind of, it's sad to see, physicians working so hard and burning out because, they get obsessed with the money machine, right? So that's why I think this is a really important concept. And probably those of you who are here listening to this are already on board, but you have to hammer that point home.
Sorry.
There you are.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. She had like the ability to, I don't know, speak. The microphone turned off, so we had to go get the permission. I just wanted to know, are there anything specifically that, I guess, as a medical professional that you do that help lower your taxable income? I know about the 401k stuff, the IRA, Roth, and some of those accounts, but is there anything specifically, I guess, that you guys take advantage of to lower your taxable income?
Yeah, so actually, good question. So that's actually going to be part 3, so stay tuned. But I'll give you a little teaser, right? So it goes to this slide, right? And if you look at this slide, basically the green, anything that's green is no taxes, okay? And anything that's red is taxed, right? And there's 3 phases of any investment, right? So there's your pre-tax, your gross income that you get. Then after you invest, there's during the growth phase, there's taxes that are assessed on things like capital gains from sale of proceeds or interests or dividends, right? And we'll go into all of that. So this is some of the more heavy duty finance talk stuff. And finally, during withdrawals, right? And so these are the main accounts that you see here, right? So there's the tax deferred, which are things like 401k, 403b, traditional IRAs, solo 401ks, et cetera. Right? If you're 1099, meaning you're an independent contractor, you have a lot more of this space here, right? So you could, your 401k is capped at $19,500 as a W-2 employee. As a 1099 contractor, you could potentially open a solo 401k. You are the employer and employee of a company of one, right? And so that means you can put the maximum the IRS allows into the 401k, which is $57,000, right? And so that's a pretty big deal. Your tax advantage accounts, these are accounts that will be completely tax-free in retirement. These are things like Roth IRAs, backdoor, which is basically a Roth IRA, Roth 401ks, some permanent life insurance, which we talked about last time, and we'll get into again a little bit this next session. Your completely tax-free accounts, which is really only the HSA account. There's some 529, which are college savings plans. And then finally, your taxable brokerage account, which unfortunately you will have to put a fair amount of money into your taxable brokerage account if you want to be super savers and catch up, right? The last thing I'll say that it has favorable taxation, which I'm not really going to go into because it's beyond the scope of personal financial planning, is real estate, right? So real estate gets a lot of favorable taxation. So you can take a lot of tax deductions on your real estate investments, and any rents or income that you earn can be offset by depreciation or losses that you incur on your real estate as well. So, but that's a whole nother topic. So I'm going to skip that for now. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess doing it as like a contractor where you're the boss would definitely save you a lot of money in the long term.
Yeah, and so even as physicians and as anesthesiologists, there are jobs out there where you can be a 1099 contractor, and you are able to sort of shovel in a lot of money into these retirement accounts. It's not the end all be all because some of these retirement accounts you can't access till you're 59 and a half. So if you're saving very aggressively and with the hopes of retiring early, there's not too many things that will give you, tax savings in early retirement. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, the government's going to get theirs.
Yeah. they'll penalize you.
Exactly. So we'll talk more about this stuff next time, guys.
Thank you.
All right, sure, you're welcome. So I hope that's helpful. And as I say, anytime you guys can reach me with any questions. But again, save, create that savings habit, automate your finances, make it a big part from the get-go. The easiest time to do this is when you go from a resident to an attending, and you get that big jump in income. But as long as you don't have that big jump in spending, then you can really accelerate your path to financial success. Because starting later on in life, in our 30s, we're way behind a lot of people who start in their 20s, right? And luckily we can make up for that with that higher income. So, all right, have a good night. I'll
Thank
see you
you.
guys next time. Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.